There's a lot that's required to win a campaign to be a successful candidate, but it certainly doesn't hurt to have an awesome social media campaign going on. And I don't think anyone was more successful on that front in this last midterm election than John Fetterman. And so we're very lucky to be joined by someone involved in that effort. We're joined now on the show by social media and digital expert for progressive causes and campaigns, Annie Wu Henry. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Hi, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Very glad to have, thank you so much for joining us. We had a lot of fun covering the Fetterman campaign during this cycle. We really enjoyed the digs at Dr. Oz, and so I'm excited to jump into your work there. But before we talk specifically about the Fetterman campaign, tell me a little bit about getting involved in this sort of work.
Yeah, so I don't have the most traditional background, but at the same time, I've always been interested in politics. And I grew up, I'm a zillennial, I'm in between kind of the millennial Gen Z. So I grew up with social media being a part of middle school, high school, especially college. And as I was getting more involved in things that I cared about, learning what I wanted to be doing in the world, as well as the social media platforms adapting, I always kind of included that. And so I studied journalism, communications, and political science in school, but took a less traditional political type of role outside of college. Worked in some government affairs, worked in some social media type of work, and then when 2020 hit, as everyone found a lot more time on their hands, it being an important cycle, as well as a lot of things happening in the world, I started trying to use social as the tool that I think that it is and it can be, in addition to what I was already posting about, the things that I cared about and trying to help people take action. And so when I started doing that and started kind of growing a personal platform that I wasn't really trying to do, I wanted to shift that into doing some of the work, including electoral work, organizational work that I think is really important. So I did a primary campaign in PA, then I started working in some grassroots organizations in Pennsylvania, and then obviously knew that the midterm was something I really wanted to delve deep into. I grew up and spent most of my life in Pennsylvania, actually in a very conservative, rural part of it. And so I know how important a race like this is, but that it's winnable. And so the Fetterman campaign just really felt right in a lot of ways. And obviously it was nice to come out with a win, but more so for the state and the state of the world, it was really needed, and happy to be just a small part of it.
I'm happy both to look forward to having him in office and also not having Dr. Oz, almost in equal measure. I appreciate both of those things. It is interesting that you started getting involved in this work in 2020. I think a lot of candidates and organizations all of a sudden needed to get much better in this area. They couldn't campaign in a lot of the traditional ways that they would have because of social distancing and fears of the virus and all that. So let's talk now about getting involved with the Fetterman campaign. How did that come about? And how would you describe your influence on their efforts in terms of digital outreach?
Yeah, so like I said, I kind of started in this non-traditional path online. And because of that, I had written to contribute, I had sent memes, I had been a contributor in content for a lot of these not electoral, not organizational platforms, I'd say, online, whether it's infographics account, whether it's meme accounts, whether it's people through their Twitter platforms or TikTok or whatever it might be. And so I had a lot of those personal connections and kind of thought that if something with that type of work, as well as understanding the landscape of what's happening online, if that was able to talk to some of this electoral work a little bit better, I think there's a lot of power there. And so I had reached out to the Fetterman campaign just because I was interested. I had some additional time, as well as I knew, again, the importance of it, and said, I'm around, I'm in Pennsylvania, I wanna help, I wanna do whatever I can. And as we continued to talk, and some of the needs that they kind of saw, they said, why don't you come on full time? And it really wasn't how I expected to get involved. I thought I'd kind of be social media consulting or maybe contributing or doing some work, but full-time efforts was at the end of the day, I think the best decision I could have made. And I really tried to bring that non-traditional background in because I think, again, there's a lot of power there. And if you're able to utilize it in concentrated and strategic ways, I think that you can make a difference and an impact.
So I'm curious about the actual work and the impact that was made. Were there any like operational core principles in the team for when you set out, what are you going to be trying to communicate via social media? What are your overall goals? Are there any things that you're worried about? Because obviously, like, he had a non-traditional social media presence. There's always the risk that you potentially could go too far. You could have something that doesn't land right. What were some of the principles that you and others working on the team used to try to create the most effective digital side?
Yeah, so I think John Fetterman and everything about his race, it was about authenticity, right? And showing that John is authentic. He is from the state. He is a guy. I think Obama's quote was he's a dude. He's one of you. And I think keeping true to that in everything that was done, including social media. And that really paired well with what we were doing with defining the opponent of Oz, is that he's not authentic. He's a fraud. He has a bunch of houses and he's not one of you. He doesn't get it. He's not from the state. And he is kind of just like cashed out whenever he could, despite what happens to the people that he's impacting. And so I think keeping true to all of that, as well as keeping true to John's principles of he's not gonna play dirty in the same sense of how we saw our opponents. When we thought they couldn't go lower, they did. And even though we were making digs, it was in a way that still didn't go against who John is, and that is a good person. And so we're not going to be doing things like attacking his things about him in the same sense that they attacked John. It's going to be things like pointing out how many houses he has and that he doesn't even know, because normal people know how many houses they have. And honestly, for most young people, it's none. And so I think it was very intentional. I will also say that we had such an extraordinary team. It was obviously not just myself, and so many just incredible minds. And I think people that really understood it in so many different levels of, they were also really online. They were also really, from the state and understanding how Pennsylvanians are gonna think about things and what things are gonna resonate. People who were funny, people who were also maybe not traditional, that weren't thinking that we had to play by a certain playbook. And so I think all of that coupled together really produced, obviously, I think some really special moments that clearly resonated with Pennsylvania.
Yeah, clearly. And he did very well, particularly in the youth vote, which certainly helped. I mean, it was still at the end of the day a fairly close election. And so any number of these different things could have been responsible for putting him over the edge. Going forward, though, one last question for you. I know a lot of candidates, a lot of incumbents would love to have a successful social media campaign like this that produces these viral moments and everything. I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of efforts to duplicate what you and your team put together. How easy do you think this is going to be to duplicate for other people? Does it really come down to, as you've stressed, having people with this non-traditional introduction to politics? Because we know that they can produce, like establishment politicians can produce a lot of really cringeworthy social media content when they try to be hip or whatever. Do you think that other candidates are gonna be successful in reproducing this, or was there some sort of special magic to either your team or Fetterman as a candidate or Oz as an opponent? How do you see that shaking out?
I mean, every race is different, right? Like you said, we can't say every candidate is gonna be John Fetterman, every opponent is gonna be Dr. Oz. There were a lot of special pieces to this. However, I also don't think that people can't learn from what we did. And there was an article or an opinion in the New York Times that said John Fetterman 2.0 type of thing. And I don't think it's necessarily that in a copy paste format. But I do think that there are overarching principles in communication and what is authentic that can be shown. John Fetterman, he was authentic in XYZ ways. He likes sheets. He, is gonna wear hoodies, whatever. We're not gonna dress, I'll pick someone just we're not gonna do that same exact thing to someone like Pete Buttigieg, who's obviously, if he came out wearing a hoodie and talking about sheets, like that doesn't make sense,
Dear
right?
God.
But there are things about other politicians where they can be authentic to themselves and also use these platforms in ways that are authentic as well as relevant with the trends and understanding to who they are. And I think those overarching ways and ways of thinking, it's something that can be replicated and it's something that can be strategically done. And I don't think you don't necessarily need a non-traditional pathway. However, I think, part of bringing myself in, I would assume, is that I understood the landscape. And I give the analogy of like, just like you don't want a senator that's not from the state they're representing, like you want someone doing a job that they understand that space, right? And so I think bringing people in who have these backgrounds, and if it's young people who understand some of these newer platforms in ways that, maybe people who have been more established and around longer, but don't get how they work or don't get the humor there, don't get how things get shared on those different mediums. Bringing people in that are from those areas of expertise, I think is very important. And so I think that's something that can be very intentionally done when setting up, whether it's a campaign team or an administration or whatever it might be in the future in politics.
I think some good lessons to learn there. Well, Annie, appreciate the work that you did for the campaign. Very important going forward that he won. So thank you for contributing to that and for joining us on the show today. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.